Hey guys, should be a relatively quick video. I have talked about this in class. So we're looking at the English Reformation. And just let's go ahead. First of all, I didn't say this, so you may want to write it down. English Reformation creates two things at the outcome. First thing, it's called the Church of England. That's the easy one, right? And the religion of the Church of England is called Anglicanism. Oops, that should be it. All right. So I just want to point that out very quickly. So that's what we're creating. We will not create it until our second to final lecture. We're going to talk about Elizabeth and her England, which is she does solve this. I do want to point out very quickly on my introduction, I call this the spiritual bipolarism. What I traditionally do, we draw a political spectrum. There's political spectrum, sometimes religious spectrums here, of course. The conservatives are always on the right, and that's going to be the Catholics. The liberals who want most change are the Protestants, okay? And what happens here, these are going to be extremes, polar. So instead of being in the middle, they're going to be pushing along the side. And that's going to create instability. So when I look at this, when we talk about the Tudor England of Henry VIII, Edward VI, and Mary, it's going to be a story of instability, which is ironic because the Tudor dynasty, established by the patriarch Henry VII, stabilized it, right? We talked all about that. All right. But with this, very quickly, how does this happen? First thing, we start off, Henry's church is really, really, really Catholic. Well, in 1533, 34, I think it is, sorry, you get this thing called the Act of Supremacy that makes him the head of the church. Well, believe it or not, that just makes it slightly Protestant, mostly Catholic. I'll prove that to you a little bit later. When he dies, his son, Edward, who is a baby king basically, his regent makes it all the way over with the Act of Uniformity and the 42 articles, makes them the most radical. So over here, they had been having 7 sacraments. They had Latin as the language. Well, the next day, it's all the way over here to 2 sacraments. English is the language, and we'll see more changes. I would say that this English guy he goes to church. It's Catholic. It's sort of Catholic, and now it's like, oh my gosh, it's Protestant. What am I, Catholic or Protestant? I am confused. Well, the problem with Edward is he dies too young. So he dies too young. Well, who's his successor? Mary. And what does Mary do? Reverts England to more Protestantism. She gets rid of all this stuff. So now they're absolutely Catholic. And she does some terror, right? So therefore, when I do this, we know that England is bipolar because they're going back and forth to the extremes. The center is never satisfied, which makes people very sad. That's what we're trying to do, and we're about to map that out now. So any questions, please make sure you message me them. All right, historical background. These are the long-term causes. We should already remember Wycliffe. He is the English heretic during the Great Schism. He translated the Bible in English, which is a no-no in Catholicism. And we know he was just a heretic. We know that England is geopolitically isolated. They are not connected to Europe because they are an island, which means they're disconnected. So they're always going to be outside of the norm. And we know Henry VII was very successful in stabilizing and centralizing England. Before we move on, I do want to make sure you remember I talked about how he used Parliament for all the tough decisions. It's one of the reasons why during this time period you will not have a revolution, because it wasn't just the king or queen making decisions, it was the acts of Parliament that were passed. So the Tudors were able to share the blame with Parliament. Short-term causes. And this is a little over-wordy, and you don't need to know all of it. First thing we see is Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon. Catherine was married to Henry's older brother, Harold. So when Harold died, When Harold died, let me repeat that. When Harold died, that meant Catherine of Aragon was a widow, no longer married to England. That's a big problem because Henry VII wanted to marry, he wanted England to be married to Spain, which was the most powerful state. He thought that would make England great. So what does he do? He goes over and gets the Pope to annul the marriage. And once they annulled the marriage, he then had her marry Henry, his younger son. So Henry was married to his brother's wife. Kind of awkward. We'll talk about that later. But again, it's for the political reasons. We also need to know Henry was a devout Catholic. He actually liked to barbecue the Lutherans. The Pope actually called him the defender of the faith, and he did believe that he was committing a sin. By his marriage to Catherine, he believed ultimately that his sin was the reason why he had no living male heir. Catherine gave birth to Mary, and after that, she gave birth to numerous dead sons. So Henry grew to feel like he had sinned. A little bit aside, I do think Anne Boleyn had something to do with it. Check that out. Anne Boleyn, woo, she was a hottie. Henry really wanted to, well, you know what he wanted to do. And Anne said, oh, no, you don't unless you get a divorce. Because she said she wasn't going to do anything until they were married. Henry was so motivated that may, in fact, what caused this whole Reformation. I'll let you choose this when you want to do. But in the end, this is the big thing. The Pope refused to issue an annulment. He feared the wrath of Charles V. Remember, Catherine's cousin was Charles V. See? Catherine, Charles V. And remember what Charles V just did 6 years earlier. He sacked Rome. So therefore, the Pope realized if he allowed for the annulment of the marriage, it would make Catherine a whore. She would have a child out of wedlock. To annul the wedding means never to cancel. And the Pope decided he was more fearful of Charles than Henry. Well, that really dissatisfied Henry. He didn't know what to do. And that's when two closeted Protestants, two key advisors to Henry, who were really Protestants, began to manipulate him. They convinced Henry VIII that the Pope was allowing the whole country of England to go to hell. So what does he do? They convince him to have Parliament pass the Act of Supremacy. This is the immediate moment for the cause of this is the immediate moment in which the Church of England was created. And what do we know? The king is the head of the church. No longer of the English church. No longer was there a pope. So Henry's church, it's much more Catholic than Protestant. Look, how so? 7 sacraments. Same church hierarchy with bishops, archbishops, and priests. Latin was the language of liturgy, and there was this practice of celibacy of clergy. That's really Catholic. So what? 98% Catholic. The only thing Protestant was there was no pope. Henry, even on his deathbed, was a Catholic. He only did it because he did believe. Well, we can talk about that. I'll just do the what is the official. The only reason he did the whole Reformation is because he believed he was committing sin, married to Catherine, wanted to fix that and usher in a new era. But with that said, I want to point out there is confusion. If I was in England, I'd be like, am I a Protestant? There's no pope, but everything, I don't know what I am. So the question is, are we Catholic or Protestant? The answer is yes, no, maybe, we're not sure. That would be confusion. So now let's kill off Henry VIII. Henry VIII is now dead as a doornail. Now we have a guy named Edward VI. Well, he's a baby king. He's like 8 years old, give or take a year. It doesn't matter. But what we do know, he's a child king. So introduce a new term, regent. A regent is someone who rules in the name of a child king. Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, takes control, and he uses this moment to make England the most Protestant state in Europe. How does he do that? He gets Parliament to pass the Act of Uniformity that creates the Book of Common Prayer. The Book of Common Prayer is used every Sunday in an Anglican church. The Archbishop of Canterbury writes the weekly sermons, which are the liturgy, and every Anglican church, even in today's world, uses this Book of Common Prayer for their Sunday services. It centralized the church. Cranmer used this in hopes to force the Anglican Church to practice two sacraments and all that. And he had them pass the 42 Articles. The 42 Articles was a Parliament Act that established the Protestant Reformation in England. English became the language in the liturgy. Only two sacraments, Eucharist and Communion. Clergy were forced to marry, and you've heard me in class. I will tell you, it's really awkward. Clergymen had to consummate their weddings. They're forced to. In some ways, there was terror used during this time period. We won't go anywhere else. It's really bad. So what happens here is we have this radical Protestant faith. Well, for the average English person to accept these things, it's going to take years, I would say 20 to 40 years, to change the paradigm. To convince the English that this is the truth, it's going to take time. Unfortunately, Edward dies, 6 years or 8 years into his reign. It wasn't enough time for the paradigm to shift, and the people were still confused. Are we Catholic or are we Protestant? Yes, no, maybe. Creates that polarization, which is instability, which is not good for anyone. Because remember, by this time, we already know what's the one thing that unites a nation state? Religion. Now we get Mary. Mary, she goes in and forces Parliament to repeal or get rid of the Act of Supremacy, Act of Uniformity, and the 42 Articles. Therefore, she is canceling out Protestantism and makes England the most Catholic state, only tied with the only country that's equal to that is Spain, which is not a surprise because we're going to find out in a hot second why. But England is the most Catholic country in Europe, tied with Spain. And look who she married, Philip II of Spain. We're going to find out on Monday night's reading how radical of a Catholic he was. But let's get grossed out. This is the family line. This family tree has no branches. From Isabella and Ferdinand, look at how gross that is. Because Mary's mom and Philip's grandma were sisters. Gross. The only way you don't think that's gross is if you're from West Virginia. Just kidding. West Virginia people are cool. All righty. And as she did this, she used what I call, this is a WASP term, the English Inquisition, to enforce her religious policies. She is known as Bloody Mary because she killed well over 300 Protestant leaders. And this is the most famous one. Guess who that is? Thomas Cranmer. He's being barbecued. So during this time period, probably want to eat meat at the Mary's barbecues, but that's another story. It's chaos. She is using terror to change the paradigm. Unfortunately for her and the other Catholics, Mary dies soon after. From what I understand, she thought she was pregnant. Instead, she had stomach cancer, and she died childless. So therefore, upon her death, we're not sure. Are we Catholic? Are we Protestant? Yes, no, maybe. For my power mappers, you kind of know, and I've already said this in class, we're not sure. It's kind of irritating that Spielvogel doesn't solve this. We will solve this on Tuesday. But the conclusion, from 1453 to 1558, 1534 to 1558, England went from very Catholic to mostly Catholic to radical Protestant to back to being really Catholic. That's confusing. The average English person didn't quite know what this meant for them, and it created spiritual chaos. In the end, there needed to be an answer, and this answer would be found with the greatest English monarch. Not just because Virginia's namesake, but it's because she is great, and that is Elizabeth the First. That is the English Reformation from Henry to Mary in a nutshell. We're going to finish that with Elizabeth. I hope this makes more sense now. With that said, I hope that you have a good day.